Welcome
Hello.
back, everybody, to our next technical session from Dr. Adam Craig, who's been with us at Brain Health Alliance for a number of years and now currently at Hong Kong Baptist University. He's going to give a presentation on our development of Parametrics, for which over the past several years um, Adam has been the lead author on our Parametrics papers. So please, Adam.
Hello. I'm Adam Craig, and this is Managing Lexical-Semantic Hybrid Records of Parametrics Analyses with the NPDS Cyberinfrastructure. It's a project I've been working on quite a long time alongside Anusha Threya and Carl Taswell. So the motivation for this is that in our modern world, with an exploding number of publications coming out every year, it's very difficult for people to keep track of which ideas emerged from what work. And there's also the highly competitive nature of the academic and industry and public sector science and industry fields that motivate people to maybe not cite certain potential rivals. And so the idea is to create a more objective standard for how well a work is citing the works that came before it, and ultimately to help trace the provenance of ideas and information in the sciences and engineering and math and such. So the parametrics are both a set of 4 counts and another set of 4 ratios that we've introduced. And the idea is that we think of each work, each scholarly work, as a collection of claims, and then categorize these claims as quoted, that is properly attributed to prior work, misquoted, misrepresenting the content of prior work, plagiarized, that's presented as novel but actually found in prior work, or novel, presented as novel and not found in prior work. We then take these 4 ratios, each of which emphasizes a different aspect. So F sub Q is sort of a general, okay, how well are they doing when it comes to correctly citing prior work, whereas FM gives more emphasis to misrepresentation, FP to plagiarism, and F sub N is representing the sort of balance of new ideas to context from prior work. Now, whereas the first 3 are sort of normative, there's an ideal value would be 1, since you don't want any plagiarism or misrepresentation. F sub N is, at least at present, treated more as descriptive than prescriptive, since it's going to depend on the kind of work, the subject matter, and various other factors. And as we can see in this demonstration, as the number of Q of quoted statements grows large compared to the number of other kinds, the 3 F sub Q, F sub M, and F sub P approach 1, whereas, or F sub Q, F sub M, and F sub P approach 1, and F sub N approaches some other value. Doesn't necessarily even have to increase toward an upper bound. Well, actually, it would eventually approach 1, but a lot slower. Then as we see, then we see here F sub M is more sensitive to increasing the number of misquotes and can actually go negative in more extreme cases. And same for F sub P with potentially plagiarized statements. And finally, the first three don't have anything to do with the number of novel statements, whereas F sub N does decrease as the number of novel statements vastly outstrips the amount of context from quoted statements. All right, so what we're presenting in this work is a handful of case studies where a human being is reviewing a specific target text. Now, ideally, we'd have that reviewer compare to every potentially relevant work ever written and look for any plagiarized claims. But in this case, we're doing a sort of targeted evaluation where we look for plagiarized claims in one particular text that someone has claimed the target text T has plagiarized from. And so we also check the statements that they've actually attributed to a prior source and check whether they're quoted or misquoted. And then also check any presented as novel statements and say if they're in C, then they're not. They're plagiarized from C. If they're not, then found in C, then they're truly novel. So we've written, and in particular, Nusha Athreya has written quite a bit about the idea of equal or equivalent entities, which is a recurring theme in our work. But for the purposes of this evaluation, we're having to keep it fairly simple and rate sameness equivalence on a scale of 1 to 4 negative 1 to 4, because I have actually seen examples where a claim is attributed to a work that actively contradicts that claim. In any case, count 2 is higher as equivalent. So they're equivalent if something A is a reasonable summary of B, A is a close paraphrasing of B, or of course they're exactly identical. Now, another point I need to make here is that we're not looking at every single sentence or every single independent clause of each article. We need to identify the key claims, that is, the genuinely novel statements and the quoted statements that are essential to making the case that the author is making about those novel observations. So for our examples, we selected 5 papers. One of them's our control case, an example of a paper not retracted for plagiarism and not actually suspected of plagiarism. And we compared it to a roughly contemporaneous, somewhat prior work on a related subject, and showed that we do indeed get no misquotes or plagiarized statements, leading to FM, FP, and FQ of 1. And there's a pretty even balance between novel and quoted statements, leading to an F sub n of 0.05. Not going to read off all these numbers in this table, but briefly, we have 3 known papers retracted for plagiarism that we got from Retraction Watch compared to papers that they're acknowledged as having plagiarized from in the retraction statements. And we can see that they all have non-zero p-values, often ones that are similar to or substantively greater than n. And though it's only Ola et al. Here that actually, where it's actually extreme enough that our fair metrics are going into negative numbers for f sub p. Now, then we also have Wilkinson et al. 2016, which introduced the so-called FAIR principles of data stewardship. And we'll get into that, but it hasn't been retracted, but we did in fact find substantive indications of plagiarism. All right, so do a slightly deeper dive into each of the individual papers here. First being Tazwell 2008 versus Mons 2005. Which gene did you mean is Mons's work? And it's mostly about who should be responsible for creating semantic records, and he's specifically focused on genetics and molecular biology works, whereas Carl Tazwell in Doors to the Semantic Web and Grid with a Portal for Biomedical Computing is introducing the Portal Doors project, which is a kind of solution, proposed solution for creating infrastructure to make it easier to manage and distribute hybrid, both semantic and lexical metadata records. And so while they're on related subjects, there isn't really much overlap in the actual claims being made. Right, so getting on to the actual plagiarism cases, there's Udin et al., which plagiarized from Foster et al. Now, here there's very obvious overlap in what's being discussed. They're both literature reviews about the role of clusterin in Alzheimer's disease. And so we can see that even though the FAIR metrics were originally designed for primary research articles, they can still work and provide some indication of the presence of plagiarism or misrepresentation in a review article, because after all, a review isn't just a list of quotes from other articles. It's about creating a synthesis of the works. The opinions and analyses presented in the review article are still ideas that can be plagiarized. So put a pin at that. So now, next example, Nat et al., which plagiarized from De Hoog here, is pretty similar actually. It's another example of very obvious plagiarism. They're both talking about the classification systems for dermatophytes, something relevant to kind of skin development. And so unusually, even though Nat et al. Cite De Hoog in some places, they also plagiarize from those same works in other places in a very odd and inconsistent manner, apparently just because they didn't have enough novel ideas to convey. and so tried to embellish the apparent novelty by not citing and taking as their own some of the ideas presented in De Hoop. All right, and now a more unusual case is Ola et al. Plagiarizing from Saniswal et al., or Saniswal and Kumar rather. So Ola et al. Basically took the entire paper in which Saniswal and Kumar demonstrated a solar-powered convection dryer, and wherein the vegetable being tested with the dryer was ginger, and they just changed the name of the vegetable to asparagus all through the text. Now, on the one hand, this does disguise some of the novel statements by changing their meaning, but on the other, it actually leads to a much larger number of misquoted statements because they kept a lot of the original citations, but now are claiming they're about statements about asparagus when they're actually about ginger. And now finally, there's Wilkinson et al. So this isn't our first rodeo taking a look at the Wilkinson et al. Paper here, which was published as an opinion piece in Nature Scientific Data. In our EKI 2019 paper, we did detail how there is an exact correspondence between the pre-existing design principles described in Caswell 2007 and the so-called FAIR principles. For each of the so-called FAIR principles has an equivalent statement found in Caswell's work. So they did get a few novel statements, but all of those are about the claimed process of community building and consensus creating and raising support for these so-called principles. Now, finally, the PDP dream ontology part. If you're phobic of XML tags, sorry to anyone who finds them visually off-putting or anything, but in this case, they are important because being able to use the PDP dream formal ontology lets us create computer-readable records of the analyses that our human reviewers are doing. And so these records let you record a match between statements from two different works. They let you record the statements themselves either as the original plain text or as an RDF triple. And they let you record the final fair metric values that you calculate. And so we believe this will be an important data set for future work. And so we're recording these analyses and creating records of the works being analyzed and publishing them through our Portal Doors system. So known or suspected plagiarism cases go in a special Fidentinus directory, whereas the remaining non-plagiarizing articles go in their own appropriate directories based on problem domain. So the key points here are that this manual, this human brain-powered evaluation comparing papers is both to show the utility of the FAIR metrics as a tool for a better, more open, more transparent peer review with quantitative measures and greater objectivity, and also to create this data set of semantic records of comparisons of papers, which will play an instrumental role, serve as a gold standard for developing future automated techniques. And for those who are interested, here's more reading about the Fairmetrics and about the Portal Doors project in general, the DREAM principles, and where you can reach us with questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Adam. That was a very nice summary of where we're at with the parametrics. I do think we are going to look forward to enhancing this set of metrics to address the matter of overlapping reference lists in test versus comparison papers. And I do think we also need to develop an appropriate means to better differentiate plagiarized versus misquoted when it's obviously plagiarized, and then there's just one word changed with that case example of asparagus. And so one of our future questions that we should investigate and consider developing a solution for would be where to draw the lines between what is going to be called plagiarized versus what's going to be called misquoted when we have that kind of asparagus example. So if you have any initial thoughts about that, please share with us.
Well, yes, it's a tricky question. The original ethos, the original motivation behind the Fairmetrics was to catch plagiarism in cases where people tried to obfuscate it by changing the wording. And so the logic was to instead look at, do these statements mean the same thing? Is the idea the same? Now, if we say, okay, the idea is changed, we can say, okay, but how is it changed? In this case, so now the ideas aren't an exact match, but you can still say there are gradations, same, similar, related, or different. Again, see Ms. Athrea's papers for more about that. But we can say that we could ask, like, is this difference important or is it a trivial difference? Like here, the main idea is testing a solar dryer, and they haven't really changed that. They've just changed the substrate. Now, in some other context, maybe substrate used, something that might seem trivial, like the substrate used, is actually important. Like if you're growing a fungus, maybe like you're culturing fungi for some sort of biological assay on them, like sequencing their genomes or something. Maybe testing the effects of different growth mediums is an important point, where in another study, maybe the strain of fungus is the variable you're looking at, or you're doing a cross comparison on both variables. But yeah, so in this case, again, we kind of have to appeal to human intelligence at this point to say what details are important versus what details are trivial or are just a sort of red herring. The alternative way of looking at it would be to go back to lexical comparisons and use them as a complementary check in addition to the Fairmetrics as they exist in their pure sort of meaning-oriented form. So a lexical check probably would have also found something fishy with Ola et al. Because it was also the wording was also nearly identical for most of the paper. So those are both sort of valid strategies and are in no way mutually exclusive. But I think this is going to be a challenge going forward for an attempt to automate the fair metrics analysis, since a computer just by default doesn't have any concept of importance, of whether something's an important detail that's key to the big ideas of the work, or whether it's just an implementation detail.
Well, I think as we develop a more practical experience with human brain-powered analyses, we'll take that body of experience and implement eventually, hopefully, with weighting factors. But we should keep attention focused on this question of how to distinguish, differentiate just exactly what we're going to call misquoted versus what we're going to call plagiarized in these situations where it could be interpreted possibly either way, depending on perspective. A lot of this also gets back to how we're going to incorporate any information that we have available about authors' intent. So in some of our other work, we have addressed the question of what do authors do when a mistake is brought to their attention, and whether or not they correct the mistake or refuse to correct the mistake. That retrospectively essentially provides information about author intent. So let's keep open possibility to how we may accommodate author intent and author willingness to correct mistakes at some point in the future development of these parametrics in a more quantitative way.
I agree that it's important to also look at the paratext in this case. That's what people in literary circles tend to call this thing, the
Yes.
body of written records around the text of the article itself when determining whether something was plagiarized. Like in this case, did they actually did the authors of the plagiarized paper attend a conference together? Did they exchange correspondence?
Well, I know that a good number of us will be looking forward to another update at Guardians 2024, a year from now. So thank you very much for a great summary of where we're at with the parametrics. And with that, we'll close this particular session. Thank you.